The cold wind slashed through New York City like an invisible blade that morning. From the top of the Carver Building, one of Manhattan's highest towers, everything below looked distant, almost unreal. Sergeant Harlan Whitaker of the NYPD pushed open the heavy rooftop door with his shoulder, breath fogging in the sharp air. At his side, Argus, his loyal K-9 partner, a German shepherd with intense eyes, sniffed the wind with growing unease. The emergency call had been brief but urgent. Possible civilian threat on the rooftop. Bring the dog. The kind of message that tightens your gut instantly. When the door swung open and Harlan stepped onto the exposed concrete, an unsettling silence wrapped around him. There were no people, no voices, just the howling wind and a tension that clung to every surface. But Argus didn't pause. As if pulled by an unseen force, he moved with purpose straight to the edge. With practiced agility, he jumped onto a metal utility box and froze, staring into the abyss of New York City below, eyes locked onto something far beneath them. Argus, Harlan whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a low, guttural whine, followed by a sharp, urgent bark. Harlan stepped closer, heart hammering in his chest. The wind howled louder now, like it carried the weight of forgotten memories. When he finally looked down over the edge, his breath caught. Below, at one of the city's busiest intersections, flashing lights formed a chaotic cluster. Police cruisers, a scattered crowd, and at the center, a lone figure on the pavement. From this height, it was hard to make out details, but something about it felt wrong. Argus began to tremble. Not from the wind, but from something deeper. His muscles were tight, his breathing shallow. Harlan had worked with him for years, through raids, standoffs, and shootouts. But never had he seen Argus shake like this. Then, without warning, a memory surged from the depths of Harlan's mind. A woman with green eyes, an apartment in Queens. A name he hadn't said out loud in nearly 20 years. Calla. Argus barked again, louder this time. It wasn't a warning. It was grief, panic, recognition. And in that single moment, Harlan understood. Argus knew who was down there. And if he was right, this wasn't just another call. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Sergeant Harlan Whitaker stood frozen at the rooftop's edge, his hand resting lightly on Argus's back. The dog's body remained tense, his breathing uneven, his eyes locked on the scene below like he was watching a dream or a nightmare come to life. Harlan blinked against the stinging wind, but the image didn't blur. The woman on the pavement. There was something about the way her body had fallen, the shape of her hair, the way the EMT gently touched her shoulder before shaking his head. It all screamed familiarity. The name echoed again in his mind. Calla, and with it, memories he had spent years trying to bury clawed their way to the surface. She had been more than a lover. She was the one who made him believe, back when belief was something he still had. A volunteer medic. Brave. Unapologetic. The kind of woman who walked into chaos without flinching. But she disappeared almost 15 years ago, no explanation, no goodbye. Harlan had told himself to move on, that maybe she had just needed to escape. He never imagined she'd show up like this, broken and still, at the center of a police perimeter. "Let's go," he muttered, voice hoarse, almost cracking. He tugged Argus's lead gently, but the dog resisted, unwilling to look away. "Argus, come on." There was hesitation in the animal's eyes. Something unspoken. Something Harlan didn't quite understand yet. But finally, the dog stepped down, though his head remained low, and his gait was slower than usual, as if each step was heavier than the last. The ride down the building was suffocating. The elevator creaked with age, and the fluorescent light above them flickered erratically. Harlan's mind raced with questions, but no answers. How could Argus recognize her from that height? Was it her scent carried on the wind? Or something deeper? They had trained together, the three of them, back when things were simple, before the assignment that went terribly wrong, before secrets were kept. When the elevator opened into the lobby, 2 officers were already waiting for him. "Sergeant Whitaker?" one of them asked, eyes darting nervously. "They need you at the scene." The woman. She had a note. And your name is on it. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Harlan's knees nearly gave out. Argus barked sharply, sensing the change in him. He didn't speak. He just nodded once and walked through the glass doors into the blinding chaos of the street. Sirens, voices, lights, but all of it faded as he crossed the barricade. In his chest, something old was stirring. Something dangerous. He hadn't heard her voice in 15 years. But somehow she'd spoken to him again. The world around Harlan blurred as he approached the woman lying beneath the white sheet. Officers stepped aside. EMTs gave him solemn nods. The noise, the sirens, the radios, the murmurs, faded into a distant hum. All he could hear was Argus's steady breathing beside him and the storm of thoughts thundering in his head. He knelt down slowly, the cold pavement biting through his uniform pants. A gloved hand lifted the corner of the sheet just enough for him to see her face. It was her, older, paler, but unmistakably Calla. Harlan's breath hitched, and for a brief second, everything else vanished. The time apart, the unanswered questions, the resentment, all that remained was a sense of irreversible loss. Argus sat beside the body, head bowed low, as if mourning in his own silent language. His tail didn't move. He didn't sniff or nudge her. He simply sat, as if he understood what death meant. "Sergeant," one of the officers interrupted gently. "We found this in her coat pocket." He handed Harlan a plastic evidence bag. Inside, folded neatly, was a note, handwritten, smudged slightly by moisture, but legible. Harlan opened it carefully. The handwriting hadn't changed. Sharp, clean lines. His name was the first word. "Harlan, if you're reading this, it means I've run out of time. What I told you 15 years ago wasn't the whole truth. I couldn't say it then, I was being watched. But now you need to know. He's still alive. And he's looking for me. I never meant to disappear. I was protecting you. There's a box in the old safe house. You'll find the key where we said goodbye. I'm sorry. Calla." Harlan stared at the paper, disbelief tightening around his throat like a noose. He's still alive. The words echoed in his head, repeating over and over. His hands trembled, and for a moment, he thought he might be sick right there on the street. Argus whimpered softly and leaned against his leg, grounding him. 15 years of silence. 15 years of pain. And now, this mystery, unfinished business, and a hidden box in a safe house he hadn't stepped foot in since everything fell apart. Harlan looked back at Calla's lifeless face. Whatever she'd been running from, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And now it was coming for him, too. The rain had started by the time Harlan reached the old pedestrian bridge on the edge of Queens, the place where he and Calla had last seen each other. It hadn't changed much. Rusted metal, cracked concrete, and the distant sound of trains below, the kind of place that held memories like ghosts. Harlan stood there for a long moment, hand gripping the damp railing, Argus sitting quietly beside him. The past hung in the air like fog, heavy and cold. 15 years ago, they had argued right here, beneath a sky just as gray. Calla had been frantic, whispering about something she couldn't explain, eyes darting behind her like someone was watching. He remembered the way she held his face, told him to forget her, to walk away, and he had, because he believed she was trying to save herself from her own demons. But now, he wasn't so sure. His boots echoed against the concrete as he knelt near the base of a rusted beam. Beneath a loose slab of cement, he found it. A small weathered pouch sealed in plastic. Inside was a tarnished brass key and a folded photograph. The picture was of the three of them, Harlan, Calla, and Argus. Back when he was just a pup. They were smiling. No uniforms. No fear. Just a sliver of a different life. But on the back of the photo, in Calla's handwriting, was a single sentence. "You'll know what to do when you feel it again." He stared at those words, heart thudding. Feel what again? He looked down at Argus, who was now sniffing the area carefully. His ears perked. The dog stopped suddenly, tail stiff. He barked once, then looked directly at Harlan. Not in alarm, but in recognition. It was the same bark from the rooftop, the same energy, that moment of certainty. Harlan took a deep breath and stood. The key was old, but he recognized it. It belonged to the safe house near the docks, an NYPD black site long decommissioned. Only a few people had ever known about it. And if Calla had used it, if she'd hidden something there all these years, it meant whatever she was running from was connected to their time on the inside. Not just criminals. Something dirtier. Something they were never supposed to talk about. He pocketed the key and looked back at the bridge. The ghosts weren't done with him yet. The safe house was hidden behind a row of abandoned shipping containers along the Hudson River docks. Time had not been kind to it. The metal door was rusted. Graffiti marked the outer walls, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. But the second Harlan stepped inside, the memories came rushing back. Briefings whispered in low voices, late-night operations scrubbed from official records. The stench of fear soaked into the walls. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was where secrets had been built and buried. Argus led the way, nose twitching with every step. The safe house was mostly empty now, but the old locker room in the back remained untouched. Harlan stopped in front of locker number 12. He didn't need to check the tag. This had been Calla's. The brass key clicked in the lock with a sound that echoed too loudly in the silence. For a moment, Harlan hesitated, his hand resting on the cold handle. Part of him wanted to turn around, leave the past sealed away. But he opened it. Inside was a simple wooden box, no larger than a shoebox. It was heavy when he lifted it, solid, real. There was also a sealed envelope taped to the lid. His name was written across the front in Calla's handwriting, shakier this time, as if written in a rush. He tore it open. Harlan, if you've come this far, then I didn't make it. What we stumbled onto wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. Project Ember was real. We were never meant to know. I took something. I hid it here. It's in the box. If they find out you have it, they'll come for you too. Don't trust anyone, not even inside the department. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, but you were always the only one I trusted. Harlan felt the weight of her words settle into his chest like stone. Project Ember. It sounded familiar, but distant. Something buried under years of cases, paperwork, and quiet threats. He opened the box carefully, half expecting it to be empty. But inside was a hard drive, wrapped in layers of cloth, and a small voice recorder, one of the old models from before things went digital. Argus let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the door. Harlan stood, closing the locker. The moment he tucked the box under his arm, he felt it. That shift in the air. The certainty that someone, somewhere, already knew he had it. The past wasn't just following him anymore. It was catching up fast. Back at his apartment in Brooklyn, Harlan sat in the dark, the only light coming from the small desk lamp that flickered slightly with the storm outside. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, like a countdown. Argus lay at his feet, unmoving, but alert. The wooden box sat open on the table. Harlan stared at the old voice recorder for a long moment before finally pressing play. First static, then her voice. If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. But I need you to understand it wasn't just about me. It was bigger. They were experimenting, Harlan, on people, on kids. Harlan's stomach turned. The voice was Calla's, but softer, more afraid than he remembered. Her breaths were shaky. Words rushed like she knew she was running out of time. She spoke of files, buried investigations, and a program called Project Ember, a supposed anti-radicalization operation that had gone dark years ago. But what she described wasn't intelligence gathering. It was psychological manipulation, testing behavioral triggers, rewriting memory patterns, and the test subjects hadn't volunteered. I found out by accident. One of the kids, they called him Marlowe, escaped. He showed me what they did to him, what they made him forget. I couldn't walk away. The recording clicked off. Harlan sat in silence, his mind racing. None of this made sense, not at first. But the more he thought about it, the more fragments of old cases began connecting in ways they never had before. Names scrubbed from reports, witnesses who changed their stories, officers who disappeared. He remembered a case from 2010, 2 missing teens, no motive, no leads, both declared runaways. But one of the names from that report was scribbled in Calla's note. Marlowe Green. He turned to the hard drive, heart pounding. He didn't know what was on it yet. He wasn't ready to look. Not without a plan. Not without knowing who he could trust. Calla's warning echoed in his head. Don't trust anyone. Not even inside the department. A sudden knock at the door froze him in place. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Argus growled, rising to his feet, his hackles raised. Harlan reached for his weapon, heart slamming against his ribs. No one knew he was here. No one was supposed to. He moved silently across the apartment, pressing his back to the wall beside the door. Another knock. This time, 2 short taps. Then silence. It was a code. One he hadn't heard in over a decade. Someone from the old unit. Someone who wasn't supposed to be alive. Harlan's finger hovered just above the trigger as he stared at the door. His breath shallow and sharp. Argus stood tense beside him, a low growl rumbling in his chest like a warning. That knock, it wasn't random. It was a pattern. Specific. A code only shared among the old unit. But that was impossible. The last time anyone had heard that knock, Luther Hale had been declared Calla, killed in action, during a covert op in Eastern Europe. Burned. Gone. No body. No answers. Another tap. Then silence. Harlan tightened his grip, then swung the door open with one swift motion. Gun raised. Standing in the dim hallway, drenched from the rain, was a man with a thick beard, sunken eyes, and a face aged beyond his years. But the moment their eyes met, Harlan's heart stuttered. It was him. Luther? He breathed, disbelief thick in his voice. The man gave a weary nod. You were never supposed to see me again. Harlan stepped aside without a word, and Luther entered cautiously, his movements slow, like every muscle ached. Argus didn't bark, but stayed close, watching him carefully. Luther glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the open box and the hard drive on the table. His expression darkened. So she told you, he said. Harlan nodded. Not everything, just enough to scare the hell out of me. Luther pulled off his wet coat and sat down with a groan. Project Ember didn't die. It went private. Off the books. They made it look like a government shutdown, but the operation was sold. To who, I don't know. What I do know is, Calla was right to run. Harlan felt the room closing in around him. Every wall, every light, every breath. You knew she was alive? I helped her disappear, Luther admitted. I owed her that much. We all did. But she reached out to me a week ago. Said someone had found her again. Said if she didn't make it, I had to find you. Fast. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They're not just after the drive, Harlan. You were part of the experiment. The words hit like ice water. Harlan stepped back. What the hell are you talking about? You don't remember, Luther whispered. But you were one of the first. So was she. So was I. Harlan's ears rang with silence. Argus whined, sensing the shift in energy. In one moment, Harlan's entire identity cracked. His past, his memories, his choices, none of them might have been his own. The storm outside had grown louder, more aggressive, as if the sky itself was reacting to the truths being unearthed inside that apartment. Rain slammed against the windows in violent bursts, and thunder rolled across Brooklyn like distant explosions. But inside, there was only stillness, heavy, suffocating silence. Harlan sat hunched forward, both hands gripping his head as if trying to hold his thoughts in place. Across from him, Luther leaned against the wall, face drawn and eyes shadowed with years of silence. Argus paced between them, restless and alert, ears flicking at every creak of the old building. Harlan finally lifted his head and met Luther's eyes. You're telling me everything I remember about my past might not be real, he said, voice hoarse. That I was... What? Some kind of lab rat? You weren't the only one, Luther said quietly. But yes, you were part of a trial group in Project Ember. Your memory was intentionally altered, bits and pieces removed, then rewritten. It wasn't just about forgetting. It was about controlling what you believed about yourself, about others, even your emotions. Harlan shook his head, trying to make it make sense. Why would I even agree to something like that? You didn't, Luther replied. They never asked. It started when you were recruited into the task force. High-stress environments, sleep deprivation, psychological conditioning, they created the perfect cover for memory manipulation. You were vulnerable. They took advantage of that. And Calla, she figured it out, Luther said, his voice tightening. She wasn't supposed to. They were monitoring you both, testing how emotional bonds could survive manufactured reality. But she started remembering pieces, sessions, experiments, names. That's when she ran. Harlan leaned back in his chair, numb. Everything he'd built, his career, his identity, even his loyalty to the badge, was now crumbling in real time. His memories with Calla weren't all lies, but they weren't untouched either. The connection he felt with her, the reason she lingered in his mind for years, wasn't just love. It had been engineered, and yet it still felt real. That confusion burned deeper than any wound. Luther placed a small USB stick on the table next to the hard drive. This has partial footage from Ember sessions, training rooms, testing logs, subject profiles. Yours included. Your code name was Echo 7. Hers was Ren. You were a paired set, monitored, measured. Every moment between you watched. A sudden growl from Argus snapped them both to attention. He was facing the door now, tail low, body tense. Then 3 slow knocks. Luther's eyes narrowed. We've been found. Harlan stood, heart pounding as adrenaline surged through him. He grabbed the hard drive and the USB, stuffing them into his jacket. He looked at the photo of him, Calla, and Argus on the table, frozen in a lie, but still the most real thing he had left. If they made me this way, he muttered, then they know exactly what I'm capable of. The knock on the door wasn't followed by a voice. No demands, no movement, just stillness. That silence was more dangerous than any threat spoken out loud. Harlan's instincts kicked in fast, old training that had once felt like muscle memory but now carried new, uncomfortable weight. What if that training had been programmed into him? Luther nodded toward the back. We exit through the fire escape. Quiet. No hesitation. Argus was already there, waiting, eyes locked on the shadows outside. Harlan grabbed his bag, hard drive, USB, photo, and followed. Rain soaked them instantly as they descended into the narrow alley behind the building. 2 blocks over, Luther's black sedan was parked beneath a dying street lamp, the only thing still glowing in the storm. They didn't speak until they were safely inside the car, engine rumbling low. We can't go back to your place, Luther said. They'll torch it. They've done it before. To who? Harlan asked. To anyone who got too close to the truth. Luther pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. Coordinates. This is where we go next. Upstate. Remote facility. Abandoned, supposedly. But it's where Project Ember started. Before it had a name. Before we were even aware we were part of it. Harlan's grip on the door tightened. What are we hoping to find there? Confirmation, Luther said. And maybe the original Echo Protocol files. The source code they used to rewrite your memories. If we can get that, maybe we can undo it. The road stretched long and dark ahead of them. Argus sat between the seats, head resting on Harlan's leg. The dog hadn't made a sound since they left. That wasn't normal. He was alert but quieter than ever before. Harlan stroked his fur, wondering if Argus, too, had been changed by all of this. What did he remember? What had he seen? 2 hours into the drive, Luther's phone buzzed. An encrypted message. No name, just a line of text. You're not the only one who woke up. Luther handed the phone to Harlan. It's her network, Calla's. Someone's still active. Someone's tracking us. Hope and fear battled in Harlan's chest. Then maybe she left more than a warning. The trees thickened around them as they left the highway and turned onto a gravel path. The facility was near, a shape in the woods swallowed by fog and time. As they approached, Harlan spotted faint lights flickering through broken windows. "Someone's already here," he whispered. They stopped the car and got out slowly. Argus growled low. And then gunfire, screams. And from inside the building, a voice crackled over an old speaker system. "Echo 7. We've been waiting for you." The speaker's voice echoed through the broken walls of the facility, mechanical and cold. "Echo 7. We've been waiting for you." The sound made Harlan's skin crawl. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Familiar, precise, programmed, designed to trigger something buried deep inside him. Luther motioned for silence, hand raised, as they crouched low behind a wall of rusted equipment. Argus stood perfectly still, ears high, eyes locked on the corridor ahead. The dog was in full alert mode, sensing what was coming even before it revealed itself. Harlan's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was fear or rage anymore. Maybe both. They moved slowly through the building, the flickering lights above casting long, twisted shadows. The air smelled of mold, oil, and something sterile, like a hospital that had been sealed and forgotten. Down a hallway lined with shattered glass and cables, they found a reinforced door, the same number etched into it as Harlan's old field ID E7. It opened before they touched it. Inside was a room untouched by time. Computers still hummed. Monitors blinked with old code. In the center, a chair. Metal restraints. Needles. Wires. This was where it had started. On the far side of the room, a woman stood. She was older now, thinner, but her eyes. Harlan would never forget those eyes. "Calla." He stepped forward, but she raised her hand to stop him. "I triggered the message," she said. "I needed you to come here, to remember." Luther stood frozen, processing the shock. Harlan's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me you were alive?" "I couldn't," she said softly. "Not until you were ready. Not until the memory block started to fail. You were waking up. I had to let you get there on your own." Behind her, a large monitor turned on by itself. Footage played. Young Harlan, strapped to the chair, emotionless. Calla beside him, begging the technicians to stop. Her screams were muted, but her agony was unmistakable. "I fought for you," she said, her voice breaking. "They used me to control you, and when I resisted, they wiped us both." Harlan stepped closer. "What is this place now?" "A trap," Luther said from behind. "They want you to reboot the program. Voluntarily." Calla nodded. "They knew you'd come for the truth. But now you have a choice. You can walk away, expose them, or sit in that chair and remember everything." Harlan looked at the chair, then at Calla, then at Argus. The dog looked up at him not as a soldier, but as a friend. Harlan dropped the drive onto the floor and crushed it under his boot. "No more programs," he said. "No more lies." He took Calla's hand, and together they walked out the front door, free at last from the version of themselves they were never meant to be.